Yeah, I mean, for the past few weeks, I've noticed three major concerns I have. The first is just a total lack of leadership. I don't feel like our politicians really understand what it's like to be on the ground, especially as business owners. Second thing I see is a disproportionate response to the virus. And finally, a total lack of science-based decision making. And as you said, every death is a tragedy, and we should try to prevent it. But this response is disproportionate. I looked at the figures last week for one day. The smoking-related illnesses was 10 times those of COVID for the day. And yet, Greg, there wasn't a lockdown on tobacco stores. And that's the problem. This government doesn't seem to be making a proportionate decision. And they seem to also be going for these convenient sound bites, like you said, circuit breakers. And they seem to be making these things that, I mean, quite frankly, to me, feel like they're just plays to get elected again. They don't seem to be really understanding the concerns of the small businessman. I've been an entrepreneur for going on 20 years right now. And uncertainty is the worst thing for an entrepreneur. You mentioned in Liverpool, you can't tell people with 2 days notice that you can't be selling, your brew anymore. The worst thing you can do for a business is give them uncertainty in the future. And yet that's exactly what we're doing with these random changes, these tiers that can change, these curfews that can change. And that's a real killer for entrepreneurs. They need to really understand what they can do and what the future looks like. And it's something that's a real concern. And it's something I just wish our politicians understood a little bit more and understood, well, this is the fabric of our economy. This is what we need to do to keep it safe and keep us moving forward. Now I just see these lockdowns just ruining everything. And I don't see some of these businesses coming back. And I can't imagine some of these pubs, these local pubs that really are the only meeting place for some of these communities going out of business, maybe never to come back. And if they're replaced, are they going to be replaced by a franchise coffee bar? It's just it's not the same thing, is it, Greg?
Yeah, and that is what we're facing. I mean, it's already happening, I'm afraid, in parts of the country. London, of course, has a particular problem because of the fact that people are not going to work in the same way. That's desperate for all those pubs that are reliant on the office trade, for taxi drivers as well. There are many people who are really struggling, and I don't hear their voices being listened to in City Hall or in Westminster, and they really need to be, because, as you say, we are going to lose part of our heritage and our history, something as a country that around the world people identify with as being British. What do you think of the key things of the British? Well, maybe the Queen, maybe, but certainly the pub would be in there, I think, in a top 5 of things that people from other countries think about as, the great British pub. And yet we're on the verge of destroying it through what I believe is the wrong strategy. But even if the government insists on this strategy, it must properly support the businesses. It did at the beginning. There was support for many pubs at the beginning. Not all. There was, unfortunately, a bizarre situation where larger pubs were not offered access to any grants. So it was one of those loopholes. But nevertheless, there was support for other pubs. But now, there's this complete lack of understanding that these restrictions, and the restrictions for all pubs of the 10 p.m. curfew and mandatory table service, which, frankly, if you go into a pub, you'll realise that makes staff less safe than if they were serving the more traditional British way behind a bar with a perspex screen. But of course, it also means that you have to have extra staff to be able to serve at the table. That's an extra cost when you've got less trade. But then when you add the other restrictions of tier 2, the possibility of closure with tier 3 or a complete closure in a national lockdown, as you say, it's impossible for businesses, including pubs, to know what to do, to plan. If pubs in Liverpool, if they're allowed to open again in, say, a month's time, and that's not clear, they don't know, then they need time. They need at least 2 weeks' notice to order beer in, to get ready. But how many will feel confident doing that? Because then they might be told another 3 weeks later, we've got to do it again. It's not sustainable. It's not fair, and it's not working. And I'm afraid, I can tell you certainly, Brian, that the government has lost the confidence of Britain's publicans. There is real anger and dismay at the way their voice is being ignored and the way that they are being restricted and restricted and scapegoated and not being supported. We've collected already 1,200 publicans signing a letter to the Prime Minister expressing that fear. Sorry, a letter to the Chancellor. We sent another one to the Prime Minister yesterday. And that's expressing that anger. And there are more publicans signing that all the time. But there is real anger at the way that pubs are being treated. And, if that carries on, then I think you will start to hear that expressed more and more in pubs up and down the country. And as you see closures, I think communities will join that anger too. And I hope they do, but I hope the government sees sense and actually realise that they do need to change course, that they do need to review these restrictions, but also where they do impose them, that they give proper support, which isn't happening at the moment.